All right, for those of you online, we're trying out this new OWL technology that the state chapter let us borrow for 6 months. What you should be able to see on the screen is it tracks movement, tracks sound, I believe. And then on the very top bar, it gives you a 360 view of the room. So hopefully it makes it a little bit more inclusive. And some online on the chat, we're already talking about it sounds garbled. So this also has a surround microphone. And so hopefully we'll figure out is that sufficient? Will this work for us? So instead of that lapel mic that we've been using in the past, we'll try the OWL and see how well it works. The resolution isn't as great as I would like, but still it's pretty nifty. For those of you that are online, can somebody tell me how I sound and how the video looks?
Video looks fine, Robert.
Agreed. And the sound is slightly, bass, maybe that kind of garbled, but can still
Yes.
decipher it.
Yes, it's a little weak, but we can still pick it up,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And his comment was also said, sound is better when you're standing.
Wherever that person is standing relative to the mic, that was barely audible.
So that's Barbara across the room.
Hey, Barbara.
So it does try to pick up
Louder voice.
teacher's voice. Everybody uses their teacher's voice. It does have a surround mic on it, but one of the things that we did notice earlier that if I look away and I'm talking to somebody, then chances are good it sounds very distant. So we'll give this a try and see how well it looks or how well it sounds in works. So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. This is our February chapter meeting. On our agenda, we have. So I'm going to cover a few announcements. Pass it off at the end there. So we're going to cover a few announcements before we get to our speaker for tonight. These are images of our new class, including some of them that are with us tonight. Welcome. So what we will do is we'll be publishing this with everybody, especially so that we can welcome them whenever you see them at one of our events, at our meetings, or wherever they might be. So we're really happy. We've got 25 students, as we mentioned before. They just finished week 3, so this is week 4. And for anybody that wants to listen to the presenters that have been lecturing to our students, we are recording them and putting them onto our YouTube channel. So we had Dr. Gonzalez that talked about geology. We've had Orlando doing archaeology. We've had Dr. Benavides doing hydrology. And every time you listen to one of those, I always like hearing Dr. Benavides because he reminds me what is a resaca. Because oftentimes I cannot answer that question. Or Dr. Gonzalez who tells us that 27 million years ago, we would be at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. And it's all really interesting stuff. And some of that I forget until I hear it again. So,
That's an optimistic thing.
So again, welcome to the class of 2022. One thing I thought that would be interesting for us to see is this is the total number of hours that our chapter has been recording into VMS for the last 6 years. And we can definitely see the impact of what the pandemic, what COVID did, because there was a huge dip there. But in 2021, we volunteered 12,373 hours. And so far in January, we've donated or volunteered 1,049 hours. So I think it's important for us to see that because one of the things that we do, we report this back to Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they have decided that 1 hour's worth of our time in 2021 was worth $23. So in 2021, we volunteered $284,000, over $284,000 worth of volunteer time. And I wish they would give us a check for that amount. They don't, but that is how much they value what we do. And it's nice for us to see that because in everybody that's out there evaluating the progress of the Texas Master Naturalist, that is one of the figures that they're definitely going to look at. And it's good for us to see that too, because this is how valuable your time is every time you're out there volunteering wherever you are. There is a value to it, and we do recognize that. $23 an hour, I wasn't getting paid $23 an hour, but it's nice to know that somebody thinks I'm worth that much. So I wanted to share that with you. And I think I'll continue to do this just again, so that we keep this in perspective, that we are looking at the time that we do, and there is a huge value for it. We do recognize that. Want to recognize some milestones. Pam Bailey, Pam Bradley, combining two people. already. Pam Bradley completed 250 hours. She already received her pin. We had Diane Hall, who completed 500 hours. We had Amy Daly, who completed 500 hours. And one last person, I've reached 2,500 hours. So,
So I am here to present Robert with his 2,500 hour pin, the silver dragonfly. And also you have earned the recertification pin. So I'm going to take a picture of you holding the pin.
well, have the group in the background for me.
Okay.
So,
Oh,
yeah,
this
that-
way. Okay. Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
everyone.
You can't see it because I have that little video in front of my picture. This was not because of the cold. It's one of those days that we had so many mosquitoes that I had to cover myself up to go outside with the dogs. It's just really horrible. To 2022 membership dues, I wanted to just plug in a reminder. Half of our chapter has already made the membership dues donation. You can pay it in cash at one of our meetings, wherever you see one of our officers. A check, you can also do through PayPal. And PayPal, we are trying to overcome the cost that PayPal charges. So instead of $15, it's $16. But again, we'll take cash, check, money order, whatever you have. Don't forget the Chachalaca, the due date for articles, photos, anything that you wish to contribute. The due date is February 20th. So if you have something, definitely share that. Diane Hall is the point of contact. Again, we try to do this every quarter. It's that time of year again. So definitely think about donating for the Chachalaca newsletter. Chapter field trip. We haven't done one in a while. We have a chapter field trip scheduled to take a preview of the South Texas Ecotourism Center on the 20th. That's a Sunday. We have a special tour that we're going to give our students the day before. So for the rest of the chapter, we get to do it the day after that. So on the 20th, roughly from 10 till 12, that gives us enough time to just go out there and explore the facility too. Now, the Eco Center opens officially on the 24th. So we get to go in there before the crowds, before everybody starts pulling up plants, so we get to see it ourselves first. All right. Ed Meza, who is the director for the South Texas Ecotourism, is a member of the 2022 class, and he's graciously allowed us to go in there and get an early preview of the site. He'll probably regret it when we're all telling him where to put plants, but that's okay. He's up for the challenge. And so I will email the listserv and ask everybody to just RSVP that, yes, I can make it, just so that we have an idea of how many people will be able to make it there. Okay, so that's Sunday, February 20th.
February 20th is when your group gets to view it, but it's not open to the,
Until the 24th, yes.
where is it?
It is on Highway 100, right outside of Laguna Vista. Right, if you're headed towards the island, you turn left. There's a stripes there. If you get to that intersection, you pass it. It's just on behind you there. No, it's the first thing you see right before you get to the intersection to go either left to Laguna Vista or keep going to Port Isabel. So it's looking really good with all this rain and this cool weather. I bet it's going to be really nice this spring. We do have some new projects that we want to make sure that everybody is aware of. The Rio Hondo project, this is an effort that the city is doing. They got a grant to redo their boat ramp area. And they've asked us to help them include more natives, pollinator garden, butterfly garden, anything else that we can put in there. And this is going to be headed by Penny Brown, who had a really interesting experience out at the boat ramp, but I think she might write an article, so I won't steal her thunder. But so Penny Brown is going to be the chair for this project. She definitely needs our help, especially if folks live in that area. Great, that's if you're from Rio Hondo, that's right there in your town, which is great. And I think this is really, great to be at the very beginning when they're starting to rethink of what do we need to do to that whole area. And our input will be really valuable for that. So Penny, later on, I'll share her email for everybody to be able to contact Penny on this. Yes. Right by the bridge.
Right on the north side.
What is it, the west side of the bridge?
Yeah, the west. North.
We have a new project at the, outside of the convention center. If you recall, this little turnaround right outside the front entrance, call it Orca Circle, just because that road is called Orca Circle. The city council for South Padre Island has agreed to allow us to put in a pollinator garden there. If you guys remember, there's a lot of grass area. There's some native trees and bushes there. There's some invasives that are starting to go in there. But that whole grassy area, instead of making a golf course, we're going to put a pollinator garden. And so we have Laura Tyndall, who is also a 2022 trainee this year. She's going to be the project chair. She's definitely going to be looking for volunteers. We have a sort of a planning meeting going on Thursday so that we're going to be there and sort of get an idea of what the next steps are. But this is sort of a really nice way for us to complement the boardwalk that's already there. Birders already know that the convention center is a great spot to go check the birds during migration. We want to complement that, provide a place for the insects, which then help feed the birds that are coming by there anyway, but then some of the butterflies are just beautiful to look at anyway. So we're going to try to do that. South Padre Island is trying to implement a lot of butterfly plantings all over town. And so they were looking at this very favorably because that's something that they want to do already. So hopefully we get some input on what they choose to do at other places. So this is the SPI Pollinator Garden. And I did want to make a point of the seed collection that has already been emailed out to everybody. Folks have already turned in their names to say, hey, I want to help with the seed collection. The American Forest has a lower Rio Grande Valley sort of project team. And what they want us to be able to do is collect seeds of our thorn scrub forest. And talking to some of the folks, Barbara and I went to meet with them to sort of share with them what our members can do, what do they want to do. And they do recognize that our thorn scrub forest is very unique from anywhere else in the United States. In other places, you're talking about those huge trees, tall everywhere else. In our region, we got 25 species, 26 species that make up the thorn scrub. And they want to be able to conserve that, preserve that, and in fact, help use that in their reforestation efforts that they work with Texas Parks and Wildlife. So Barbara and I had a meeting with this. We're exchanging some emails on the instructions that they're developing on how would our members collect the seeds, how are they going to be picked up, and so on. And so we're working on some of the protocols of what they want. A lot of times they're going to line it up with when are those plants blooming, and then ask us to go out there and collect those seeds that
They don't pay you for it?
They don't pay us for it. No.
You know, when we collected juniper, they paid big money.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you can talk to them and try to convince them otherwise. We're trying to get the thorn scrub forest on the radar of the American Forest Organization that it's actually a real forest. And nobody else seems to know that outside of us. Especially when they raise the argument that, hey, this is a thorn scrub forest and 95 to 97% of it is already gone.
Only remaining is about
Yeah.
3% here.
So we're trying to help them just get it recognized nationally that this is something worth doing, which is great because they invited us to help do that. There's more information that's coming out soon, and they'll be our presenter at our March chapter meeting as well. So they'll help provide us with a bigger picture of what is the American Forest Organization, what are they trying to do, and what are they trying to do here in Nevada. So Giselle will be our presenter for the March meeting. Okay, so before I do that, any questions on anything I just shared?
Yes, can you talk about the other project we approved, the Villas at South Padre Island Golf?
Yes, thank you, Alex, for reminding me. So we did approve Las Villas at at the SPI golf course. at Las Villas at Spi Golf Course. Anyway, it's in Laguna Vista. And what they are working to do is redo some of their gardens that they have at the intersections and corners of their area and plant natives. To get rid of some of those exotic tropicals, some of them that even die because of the freeze anyway. And so we have a group, especially those that live there, that talk with the homeowners association, and they've agreed that we can help them plant natives and do something smarter. At least in our terms, but plant natives where they belong. And so that is a project that's starting out as well. I'm sorry, I forgot to put it up. Yes. And I think so and so the question was regarding the other properties that are on at SPI. And I think and so that property, I think, may be part of the discussion that we're going to have tonight. We're going to talk about that tonight. So that specific property area is out there. All right, any other questions on this information so far?
Robert, Linda Butcher here.
Go ahead, Linda.
I would like to, as president of the Shell Club, I would like to invite any of the members that would like to attend a Shell Club meeting. Our meeting is next Wednesday at 6:30 for social time, 7 for the meeting. But I've had several people ask me about it, and if they would like the link, I will try to put my email in the chat and they can email me for the link. I send it out on the Tuesday before our Wednesday meeting. But it is next Wednesday.
Great, thank you, Linda. So that was for the Shell Club. Their meetings are still being run virtually, so she'll send you the link to Zoom. So for anybody that knows Linda Butcher, she's the point of contact for the Shell Club. They are a partner organization, so attending their presentations is advanced training for us. Okay. Anyone else have anything online?
Robert, we lost your audio for a bit. We couldn't hear the question about the latest project.
The question was regarding the properties that are out at the island. And I think that's going to be addressed as part of the presentation from the Valley Land Fund. You hear me, Susan?
Yes, that's fine. I thought it was part of when you were discussing the villas, there was a question at that time, but maybe it is part of VLF.
No, it's not. So Las Villas is in Las Colinas. This was just another question about the SPI property.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we used to live in North Texas, so I keep thinking Las Colinas, but it's not. Laguna Vista. All right, great. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. Debralee Rodriguez is the Executive Director for the Valley Land Fund. She has served since August of 2012 at the Valley Land Fund, working closely with the Board of Directors and staff with respect to strategic planning, land acquisitions, stewardship, and public education activities. She provides vision and leadership to ensure that the Valley Land Fund achieves the ongoing mission, implements balanced annual operating budgets, and meets its goals for fundraising, financial stability, public visibility, and long-range planning. And she also gives us great gator gifts. All right, so I'm going to switch over.
Okay, I will admit that thing scares me. So thank you so much for the invitation tonight to be here with you, presenting a small presentation on the Valley Land Fund. By a show of hands, just quickly, how many of you are familiar at all or know who Valley Land Fund is? Okay, about half the classroom. Okay, so Valley Land Fund, we are a 501c3 organization. We partner primarily with private landowners in the last 35 years, but we also work with regional partners, municipalities, and conservation groups that are like-minded to Valley Land Fund. The mission of our organization, I think, probably needs to be, after 35 years, it probably needs to be rethought. But today I will share with you that our goal, our mission is to preserve and expand and enhance the native wildlife habitat here in what we used to call the lower Rio Grande Valley, but we are now calling it South Texas because I cover the 8 most southern counties of Texas. We hold conservation easements on over 11,000 acres here in South Texas. Of course, working with all private landowners, and our governing principle in working with private landowners is they are in charge of their land. We are not. They call the shots. We are just there to make sure that what they have gifted the Valley Land Fund, that we are taking care of. So the real story, 35 years ago, started with 5 individuals who got together in a small cafe in Alamo, Texas. Within that little, it's not even a cafe, it was really a bar, but it just sounds nicer to, it just sounds nicer to say it was a cafe. But basically, they had a goal of saving 4 acres on the Llano Grande. And they needed to come up with a plan and they needed to do it quickly. So they basically got together and started a grassroots fundraising campaign. They raised the money and they saved 4.25 acres, which is now a part of the Cerro Llano Grande, which is a Texas Parks and Wildlife Park that encompasses several hundred acres now that people get to enjoy. What do we protect? Simple, we protect wildlife habitat. That's probably one of the most important things that we protect. Working lands, without working lands, none of this is possible. Water resources, especially here in South Texas with drought and limited access. So it's very, very important to protect our watersheds. And heritage lands, individuals who want to leave a long legacy and make sure that the land continues to give and give to future generations. How am I doing on the owl? Good? Okay. So why do we conserve lands? Very, very simple. We are losing land faster than we can think of. I tell my kids all the time, I have an 11 and a 7-year-old, and I tell them every night, God does not make more land, okay? So the things that we enjoy on the weekends are the things that we have to preserve and to protect. 95% of Texas is owned by private landowners. So it's extremely important when I say that we work with private landowners. That's the only way that we will continue to save this land and make sure that it is protected for future generations. The total acreage of protected lands here in the state of Texas, including state, local parks, is 3 million acres. I'm going to get a little bit more detailed at this point, and I hope I keep it simple. But when I say that we work with private landowners, we have a toolkit, and in our toolkit, a landowner comes over to us and they tell us this goal of wanting to protect their land. And one of the pieces that we can pull out of that toolkit is a conservation easement. Does anybody here know what a conservation easement is? Okay. A conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement between the landowner and the land trust. And it's going to permanently protect the rights of the landowner and the easement holder. What we are protecting are the conservation values of that property, and there's a whole list of conservation values. So I like to think of conservation values as a bundle of sticks, okay? So every landowner, when they own a piece of property here or anywhere, they have certain rights by that property. They have mineral rights, they have hunting rights, they have grazing rights, they have water rights. So as they come to us and we tailor each of the easements of what is to be protected and what is not to be protected, we'll determine what the conservation values are of this property. So we take from the bundle of the landowner and it is transferred over to the land trust. A conservation easement does not affect whether a landowner can sell the property in the future or retain the property. And of course, every easement is tailored individually because there is not one piece of land that is the same, and there is not one landowner who thinks the same. Okay, so we're talking about conservation easements. Generally, the easements the Valley Land Fund holds and retains are perpetual easements. Perpetual easements is a really big word that lasts for a really long time. And that word is just perpetual. Wow, it's like forever. So when you have put an easement on a property, it forever stays there. And it continues to go from future generation to the next generation, from one landowner to the new landowner. We have three primary types of conservation easements. One is a donated easement where a landowner comes and says, I have rights that I want to donate to Valley Land Fund, and the biggest one that we primarily protect are developmental rights. As we continue to grow as a society, development and fragmentation of our land is happening faster than we can keep up with. So a donated easement. The next one would be a purchase easement, where a landowner is wanting to protect the legacy of the property or wanting to protect the land, but they need a little incentive to put in their pocket. And there's nothing wrong with it. And there's grants and programs that Valley Land Fund we work with, but it's rare to find them. And then of course, we also have a bargain sale, which is a combination of both a donation and a purchase. And I will talk a little bit about one of those bargain sales. Okay. So a lot of times the word easement gets a bad rap in the community of landowners. And it's simply because they feel that the land trust is going to come and tell them how to run their land or how to run their ranching operations. Not true. One of the big questions that comes up when writing an easement is energy development. So we know that according to the IRS, oil and gas, so long as that it's a minimal permanent damage to the surface is allowed. Surface mining, according to the IRS, is not allowed in order to have a conservation easement to receive the charitable contribution. And wind and solar energy, the IRS hasn't taken a stance. But I will tell you that Valley Land Fund has said no to the big wind turbines that you see very nicely out in Willacy County and in Starr County. And although I think it's pretty cool to sit out there on a Saturday night and have all these red lights blinking at you.
The library will be closing. You were dropped off. I'm just a fire. Thanks for thank you, other person. Thank you.
While it's nice to look at them, they're not very nice on the view shed. They're big eyes, you know, they just, it is just something that we feel is not, it's not a good match for the Valley Land Fund. So we have had a couple of landowners who have purchased land from a landowner who placed an easement. Somebody comes and knocks on their door and says, oh, we can make you a whole bunch of money. Let us put all these windmills on your property. But when our lease is up in 20 years, we're gonna leave them there and you're gonna have to take care of it. So the landowner comes to Valley Land Fund. We pull out the easement documentation, we get on the phone with our attorneys, and we say, sorry, but no, it's not gonna happen on our protected property. Negotiating of a conservation easement, like I said, every landowner is different and every piece of property is different. And so when we are looking at conservation values, we are looking at the historical ranching operations of the property, the water resources or watersheds, native wildlife habitat, etc. We also look at the reserved rights the landowner is wanting to hold versus what they are wanting to donate to the land trust. And once all of that happens, we take that document over to an appraiser. The appraiser appraises the property at full market value, and then they appraise the property with a conservation easement on it. And there is definitely an adjustment. We also have, and we work with organizations to provide baseline documentations. We invite people out to these properties who are biologists and who will list every single plant and shrub and tree on that property, and we will take pictures and we will make sure that if it is a native piece of a native plant or an invasive plant, that a plan is detailed on how we take care of it. So why would a landowner want to place or donate a conservation easement to the Valley Land Fund? One of the biggest reasons is the tax savings. An income tax deduction when donated, or a lower appraised value in an estate for both the donated or the purchase of the conservation easement. And what I will tell everybody who calls our land office and who wants to talk about this is that we do not give tax advice. So please call your CPAs, your estate planners, and your attorneys to review this information and talk to your family. It's really, really important, especially if it is a legacy property or a generational property. You want to make sure that your children and your children's children will understand why you did this. Okay. So in 2015, Congress made permanent the enhanced tax incentive. It allows an individual to deduct up to 50% of their AGI. So, and over the course of 15 years, my apologies. So this is probably too much wording, but I'm going to go to let's go to a hypothetical example here. So we have a ranch that's 1,700 acres here in South Texas, and the average price per acre is $2,900. So we are looking at a market value of $5 million. After we've negotiated the conservation easement, we've gotten it appraised, everything is set in stone, we take it to an appraiser, and they say that the charitable donation is worth $1.5 million according to the values that have been set aside. So now we have a $5.1 million property that has been dropped, by $1.5 million, and we are now looking at the property now being valued at $3.6 million. And I think this is another place where some landowners don't like the word conservation easements because it is not a family property and they don't see this going to generations beyond them. They can turn around and sell the property at fair market value. Now, I will say, probably in the past 5 years since I've been at the Land Fund for 10, I have seen some South Texas properties who have easements on their properties that have sold higher than fair market value, even with an easement on it. So it is possible, but it doesn't always happen. Okay, so this is how the enhanced incentive would look like. So we assume, remember, we had a 1.5 to 1.6 million deduction, right? So that they donated that portion of the conservation easement. So we're going to assume that a landowner who has an adjusted gross income Income for purpose, okay, yeah, so we have an adjusted gross income for income tax purposes of 200,000. They are allowed to take up to 50% of that, which is 100,000. So the first year of their contribution, they can write off on their tax return $100,000. And that will go on for the next 15 years. So over the 15 years, the donation that they have made to the Valley Land Fund that totals 1.5, 1.6 million, they will have been able to use up their entire deduction on their tax return. Good question, because I'm not the tax person to answer that.
It's an issue.
Okay, so what are some of the drawbacks? Okay, we talked a little bit about those. One of the drawbacks is in order to get into a conservation easement for a landowner, a sole landowner like me, it can be quite expensive. I'm getting 2 appraisals. I'm hiring, an attorney. I'm paying for title insurance. It has a list of things that we can go through that need to be paid. There is limited funding on purchases of conservation easement. Right now, there is a program with Texas Parks and Wildlife. It's called the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Program. And every biannual year, that bucket gets $2 million. Well, when you're talking about Texas being solely owned by private landowners, $2 million doesn't get us very far. The sale of a conservation easement is subject to capital gains tax. Let's see, it can only, so the first generation, so whoever donated the conservation easement, they are the only one who will receive the benefit of the donation. The property has limits that can be used in the future, and the property, of course, is reduced in value by the conservation easement. The benefits is that it allows a family who has a long-term goal of wanting to see their land remain the same for future generations. There's an income tax deduction. There are estate tax benefits. And some of those benefits can be transferred when you are transferring to heirs. There's also some estate benefits that they can take to lower their taxes. It converts the equity into cash only with purchase easements, and it of course allows the landowner to leave legacy for future generations. Okay. Any questions about conservation easement? If you don't have questions for me today, that's perfectly fine. I have a Bible here that's called Conservation Easements. It talks about it very thoroughly. It gives you 10 examples of 10 beautiful pieces of property that have been protected here in Texas. So if you have questions, pick this up or give me a call and we can have a cup of coffee and talk about how you want to save your land. Another thing that Valley Land Fund is very proud of is habitat protection and restoration projects. And that's probably right up your alley. That's probably why you wanted me to come and present. Our opportunities for individuals like you who love to give back and who love to work with native plants is how can we help? So the Valley Land Fund owns several properties across 8 counties. 2 of the most popular pieces of property are birding habitats that we have, one in Sheep's Head and one in Salanino. The one in Sheep's Head, it was acquired back in 2007, of course, a grassroots fundraising campaign of individuals, corporations, and grants that we were able to purchase 6 lots. And we also work with another private landowner who has donated adjacent property to us that makes our property look a little larger than it really is. It's less than an acre in total, and it's known as a migratory bird sanctuary. Now, there was a question in the back that when is there going to be a project available to kind of help beautify, restore this particular piece of property. We have a group of individuals who have, over the course of the last 3 years, who have taken some really, I guess it's their pride and joy in trying to take out all the ugly and put in the pretty. When I first visited the property 10 years ago, it was really overgrown. And I think we have made some great strides to go in there and have different colonies of plants. We have a north side and we have a south side. The north side is horrible. It is probably the most overgrown that it has been in a really long time. And every time I ask somebody, let's go in there, let's pool, they tell me no. And the reason they tell me no is because we have a pretty side, and the pretty side is the south side. And when you're working with birds, they always say that the north side is their cover, is their protection. Where they come out, they have their food, their water, their awesome oranges that are on the trees. And then when they are trying to shelter and find, shelter in place, they go across where they have a little bit more protection. I'm not a birding expert, and I'm definitely not a plant expert. So maybe we have an opportunity to come together and have a planning session on how we would like to see this property, but I most definitely believe that a lot of things are possible. In order for us to continue putting into this property, it's important that I do the work to find the money to put on the ground. Although you may come out and volunteer your hours, I still have to go find plants to purchase, and I still have to find ways to provide a maintenance plan on the piece of property. So this property is 100% volunteer based. And I am so thankful to what we have, but if you are interested, please get in contact with me because I think this is right around the time that we would like to put some heart and soul into it. Another property that has been in the news is the Saladino property. And when you say the news is, why was it in the news? Well, we were fighting the federal government on a border wall. And for a really long time, we had a 20-year management plan with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They are the ones who manage the property. They are the ones who provide volunteers on the property because they have neighboring property to us. So the border wall comes up, and Valley Land Fund chose to not take a stance on border walls because we, of course, also work with private landowners who also deal with the struggle of some issues that pertain to border protection. We get sued by the federal government, and Valley Land Fund chose that at the time, and I'm being very honest with you, we are a small nonprofit. We work on a zero budget year to year. And our job is to work as hard and as diligently as possible to save the property. This particular piece of property is 3.4 acres. It's not a lot. I know it's important. But when we thought of going up against the federal government, we were told by many people that we were going to lose. There's no way you're going to be able to save a 20-acre property against the border wall. And I decided to make a recommendation to the board that we come up with a dollar amount that would be okay for us to accept, put that money into another property that wasn't going to be the threat of a border wall. It backfired. It backfired terribly bad. with myself receiving death threats. All of my public information about my private life released out to the public. And I called an emergency meeting and I begged our board to take a hard stance against the border wall, and we pulled our agreement. So we saved it. Yay! Now we have a 3-point little acre birding habitat that is still being visited every day by birders, and we're very excited about it. But I just got a new letter from U.S. Department of Protection that they want to do an environmental assessment of our property again. And then unfortunately, I feel like we're back to square one, but we're taking it in strides and we're informing our communities and the individuals that support us that we hope that you will still have our backs in trying to save this tiny habitat. And that was another habitat, as somebody who, not a birder and not a master naturalist, I went in there and I said, that tree, we need to trim this. And I was told no. The birds need it, and I totally agree. After 10 years in this, I totally agree, and I completely understand. My background is a ranching background. I am the granddaughter of a rancher and the granddaughter of a farmer. So my background when it came to protecting birding habitat is very, very different, but I'm really good at fundraising money, and that's why Valley Land Fund got me. Part of our education and outreach. So in our mission statement, education is very, very important. And I do have some goodies over here today, and including are our nature photography books. Are y'all familiar with these? Have y'all seen these? Okay. So this was our largest fundraiser. This was a 16-year project. Valley Land Fund would have a photo contest, and we were the largest cash-paying photo contest in North America at the time. We had professionals and semi-professional photographers visit us from all over, and we partnered them with local ranches. And they would document, you know, they would live with these people for 3 to 6 months out of the year, take pictures, submitted them to a contest, and we made books. We made lots of money on books. So we have a total of 9 books. Some of them have completely sold out. If you don't have a copy, you can go to our website and we have great discounts on them. They make perfect Christmas gifts. My husband went to Germany not 10 years ago, about 5 years ago, and I shipped books over to Germany for everybody that he was meeting and greeting with, and by far, these are some of the most coolest gifts to get. So this is part of our education. A lot of times, landowners lived and breathed on their lands, but they didn't know what every animal and critter was that was on their property. And it gave them a beautiful document of all of the critters, the birds, the mammals, everything that you think of. And it was our largest fundraiser. Landowner Workshops is another thing that we like to do, and we primarily do this in partnership with USDA, NRCS, local attorneys or estate planners. We'll go in and we'll have some landowners join us. We'll give them all of the hoop and holler about conservation easements. We have a small membership drive every year. It's not, I don't have a lot of perks. And what I mean by perks is that I protect private lands. My landowners don't want the public on their property. So it's kind of hard to really ask people to donate to Valley Land Fund to protect other property, but I try really hard to ask anyway. And then we also do research-based projects. The most recent one is a 500-acre property in Starr County that has very rare cacti on it. We got wind of it through Texas Parks and Wildlife. The landowner, unfortunately, his heirs did not want the property. And was like, what do I do with it? But he still wanted cash to give to his kids. So with the help of Valley Land Fund, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and the Nature Conservancy, we were able to find a grant that would fund 75% of the sale, with Valley Land Fund matching 25%. And we are going to protect it into perpetuity, and we will continue to work with scientists, biologists, and researchers to continue their research on why this particular cacti and cactuses only grow there. It's so interesting, so interesting. And maybe that would be like a field trip for this group to do once I get the go-ahead, to invite y'all out and learn about a rare cacti and understand why it only grows there. Very cool. It's the star cactus, the bladder pod. And so, and of course we have peyote out there.
Good prepared.
That, okay, so how can you help? That's the big question. Well, together, we can continue connecting people to the land. We can make communities healthier. We can secure wildlife habitats and protect our clean water. We can secure local and healthy foods, because without farmers, we would not have local produce. We can protect our shores, we can keep our farmers farming, and of course, we can preserve the places of natural together. And we can do this all together. And I think I'm missing, well, I guess I'm not missing anything else. There is a big plan that the land trust across the United States, we are trying to protect 30 by 30. We are trying to protect 30 million by year 2030. And that's a lot, but it's across the United States. If you wanted to look at it another way, we could break that down into 30% of American working lands. Ultimately is what we are trying to accomplish, one together. Here in the state of Texas, land trusts, remember we talked about protected lands that included parks and state. Out of the 3 million that we talked about in the very beginning, it's land trusts that hold the 1.7 million of those acres. I don't have anything, but I'm hoping you have questions for me.
You're talking nationwide, your goal of,
Yes,
do y'all currently properties outside of the state of Texas?
Valley Land Fund does not. So every state has land trust. In the state of Texas, there's about 12 to 13 land trusts. Some of them are regional land trusts, such as Valley Land Fund, and they are 2 to 3, I think, that are statewide. So every state will be differently. However, we report all of our numbers back to our umbrella organization called the Land Trust Alliance. And so it is through them that they keep tallies of all the acres, you know, according to counties, et cetera, of how many acres are protected.
How much of Texas do y'all try to just?
So we have, our primary is the 8 most southern counties. So I wish I should have put that up. So we go all the way to Zapata, and then we cut all the way across, which includes, if you go across, that's Kennedy, and all the way down. So that may be 9 counties, but I think it's 8, something like that. And we recently just did a project in Bandera County. It's out of our scope, but as I was sharing earlier with another individual, this particular individual is from South Texas. His businesses are in South Texas. And he has a property that he loves in Bandera. He didn't want to work with anybody but us because he is familiar with us. And that gives me an opportunity to go over there and play around every so often. So that terrain is a little different than South Texas. Yeah, just a little bit. Yes, sir.
The sheet,
Okay, so north side is pretty, south side is bad, right? I may have gotten that backwards. Right, I did. First in direction. Okay, north side is pretty, back side is bad. Back side, yeah, that's the one where all the cats are. What was the question again?
there's a property next to it, I guess it would be. On the corner there. Yeah.
It's not owned by us.
Okay, that was the question.
Right, so we've made contact with the landowner. The landowner's not interested in donating it to the Valley Land Fund. And when we have talked about would they consider selling, the family has not come up with a number that they are comfortable in giving us for us to go and fundraise. Now, on the north side, closest to the bay, that is the Holland family, Alter Holland. He is a fantastic supporter of the land fund, and he donates 4 lots are a donation for us to use so long as that we keep it in native habitat. Yes. So I know. Yes, and the funny thing is there's 2 lots next to it. We've made contact with this landowner, and this landowner is Alter. So he said, well, if we can get this person to agree, then he would agree, and we could encompass that whole corner block. But that one neighboring landowner has not agreed for anything for us. So, and again, we struggle with this property every year, simply because it is a small piece of property. It is not a manicured and managed property. You know, I think of other nature places that you can go to and you can talk to somebody and you can leave a little donation. And then there's, you know, always somebody manicuring something, always. But we 100% volunteer, 100% volunteer. They do a fantastic job, and and some of them are winter visitors, some of them are locals to the area, and so it's really nice when we have that combination, because the people who do live on the island, for example, Laguna Madre Water District, you have a leak, you're losing water. Drive to the island as quick as I can. I pick up the phone and I call the local. Check on the water line for me. And sure enough, oh, we turned the water lines on for the drips. And so my meter is running constantly, but the water district says it's a leak. So it's great to have people who live there and who communicate back to us. Yeah. But again, I think it's time for our group of volunteers and organizations as the master naturalists to come together and let's have a planning session. I mean, again, I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert, but there's always ways to do things better. And so maybe now is the time. We would have loved to have done it 2 years ago and then COVID happened. This is the first presentation I have done in over 2 years. So, you know, I'm happy to be here. Any other questions? Do I scare you? Yes, sir.
I'm a landowner. And I say, okay.
Okay.
And other than the taxes, how does this benefit me? What will I see or what can I not do?
That's totally up to you as the landowner. You tell me what you want to do,
Okay, I mean, I do my normal ranching operation.
okay?
I have my wildlife that.
You got your wildlife exemption,
I
okay?
supplement feed to.
Yes, sir.
What
Well, all we do is monitor the rights that you have donated to us. And one of the primary rights across all of my 23 easements is developmental rights. So you own 1,000 acres. And if the only thing that you donate to the Valley Land Fund is developmental rights, the only thing that I'm going to look at every year when I visit you, have you subdivided it? Have you poured concrete anywhere? Have you built skyscrapers? Have you put up wind farms? That's all I'm going to do. And if you do those things, you are in violation and I'll take you to court for it. But if you don't do those things and you abide by your easement, then really the benefit, not only including the tax benefit, is to guarantee that your land will always be the same forever.
Well, I mean, like, my daughter decides to come live out there, and I build her a home with concrete.
Okay, well, hold on. In your easement as the landowner, you are allowed to have what is called a building envelope. Okay, so you know that you have a daughter and a son. And the idea is that that 1,000 acres could be divided between 2 children. You would write in your conservation easement that the land can only be subdivided once. That the 1,000 acres goes 500 to the son, 500 to the daughter. The son can get a building envelope of, say, 5 acres. Your daughter would get a building envelope of 5 acres. Now, any barn that's associated with like feed, stalls for your wildlife, all of that is guaranteed. There's no issue with that. We just don't want it to become a subdivision, right? And so when I say talk to your family, make sure it's important. One of these days, your daughter is going to have children.
That's what I was gonna say. Perpetual, so they cannot give it to their 5 kids and divide it up that.
So, well, I mean, if your daughter were to have 10 kids, right? Then you have 500 acres divided 10 ways. You can get into a bit of an issue. The whole point is to avoid the fragmentation of ruled lands. So at that point in time, the brothers and sisters decide, well, I'll buy you out or you buy me out, right? There's a lot of ways that you can look at it, and I'm not the expert. This is where I say a conversation with family, an attorney, an estate planner. We can talk about all these things, and every landowner is different. But the idea is to avoid the fragmentation of the land. And I think it just depends on how many acres you have. If we were talking about the King Ranch and they had, 10 heirs of the King Ranch and they had millions of acres, well, sure, you can divide it 10 different ways. There are still very large tracts of land. But the smaller your fragmentations break up into is the more trouble we get into. So, yeah. So we know that God's not making any more land, right? Okay. Y'all talked about thorn scrub earlier. There's only about 3% of thorn scrub here in the Rio Grande Valley, and that's all it was before, okay? And then society came in and said, well, this land is flat. We don't need that thorn scrub. So what they do, they went and bulldozed the thorn scrub and they made it agriculture land. I get it. Agriculture land is very important. We need to have land to provide food on our tables, and we need to have large ranches to have beef put on our tables. I get it, but there has to be a balance. And we know here in Texas 95% of Texas is owned privately. 3 to 5% of native habitat is the only thing that we have left. So what are we willing to leave our future generation? Just a bunch of concrete? We have to protect it some way, somehow, and the only way we can do that is through private land ownership. So continue to do what you're doing. Hats off to you. Conservation easements are not for everybody. Sometimes they make sense in a perfect world and sometimes they don't. It just really depends on what your family goals are. Any other questions? Okay, well, I have 3 gifts I'd like to give away. Can I call out some numbers on your list? So, how about number 5? Okay. So, a book, a nice little service cup for you to have a glass of iced tea or some coffee. Congratulations. Let's see. Number 13. Is that you? Congratulations. And what does the number go all the way to? 22? Well, if you don't have any more questions, I have a few little gators to give away if you didn't give one. You know, I encourage you to get outdoors. You already are. Thank you so much for what you do. It's amazing to see what the value of your hours for volunteering adds up to. Valley Land Fund, that is 100%. I'm the only paid employee. And when I asked my board if I could go part-time, they told me no. I was shocked. I guess that means I'm doing a good thing. But I rely on volunteers every single day. My board members are volunteers. The individuals who help us at our birding sanctuaries are volunteers. Our donors, without our donors, it would be impossible. And if you have any questions about conservation easements, pick up a Bible. Well, pick up an easement Bible. We won't talk about the Holy Bible. So, okay, thank you.
All right, folks, on the call in the room, any general questions from anybody? If not, thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it. For those of you on the line, thank you for tuning in and have a good evening.